You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Yes, indeed. Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Koku. I want to thank everyone who's already waiting in the room, I guess, in the chat room. I want to thank you guys who are live with me for being here while I set up everything. Let me make sure to post the invite for Discord. You guys can join our Discord either as a fan of the podcast or as someone who's interested in helping with this African-centered curriculum project that we have going on. So you guys can look in the chat room, you can click the link, and you can join us on the Discord. I want to remind you guys that this show is a part of a podcast network. The network is called KWAZ Radio. There are other shows you should be checking out on the network, like...
This is BAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the Pro-Black Perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Also, check out the Queen's Council podcast on KWAZ Radio. Make sure you guys are following all of those shows as well as KWAZ Radio on YouTube. Click the bell to be notified when there's new content. And do the same thing for this channel if you haven't done so already. Alright? So let's get to business. You know, it's Saturday. I want to do something a little different. You know, I try to always do something interesting. But I figured I'll introduce folks who might not be familiar with the credit institutions of the Yoruba. Our ancestors knew how to practice a level of group economics that went hand in hand with the way they lived their lives anyway, right? Communalism. And they figured out ways to be able to have security. I'm talking monetary security for the community, for the village, or what have you. They knew how to have resources on hand. They knew if one person had something that they needed funds for, they knew how to together create a way, right, for everyone to donate to the cause, take turns, and get their turn to have a lump sum of funds as well. I'm pretty sure it happened amongst those here in the U.S., but I'm not 100% sure. I know for a fact it's a Caribbean thing still. I know it's still an African, a continental African thing. It goes by different names, but a lot of those names are the same, or similar, I should say, right? So in the Yoruba of Nigeria, they call it the Esusu. In the Bahamas, they call it Esusu. In Jamaica, they'll call it Susu or hand, right? And same thing with Grenada or Trinidad or what have you, right? So that, you know, there's no denying where you really come from. And there's no denying that there was a culture and systems within our cultures that still exist now. And so I hope that if you never heard about it before, I hope that in this reading, you would have, you know, you will learn about it now. I see the pro-black perspective asks me if I'm eating. I don't know why he's asking that. But, you know, hopefully you guys can get from this something. And here's the challenge that I have too. Like, the challenge that I have here too comes from a personal thought. Like, I've long thought about how can you supercharge this Esusu or Esu or Susu? How can you supercharge it to be a little bit more impactful? Can you include a bank, a community bank in this that you know, that bumps it up a few fold? I want you guys to put your thoughts on it. How can, if possible, how do you think it's possible to get more people to commit to something like this, to supercharge it, where there could be some type of interest involved? You guys let me know. So the reading today is this paper on Esusu. The pro-black perspective says, never mind. Peace, family. Peace to you too. Good to see you, man. Always a pleasure, of course. The Esusu, accredited institution of the Yoruba, William R. BASCOM, from Northwestern University. The Esusu, one of the economic institutions of the Yoruba of Nigeria, has elements which resemble a credit union, an insurance scheme, and a savings club, but it is distinct from all of these. The Esusu is a fund to which a group of individuals make fixed contributions of money at fixed intervals. The total amount contributed by the entire group is assigned to each of the members in rotation. Aside from the Yoruba, there is an excellent description of this institution among the neighboring Nupe, where it is known as Dashi or Adashi in Hausa, with essentially the same patterns. It has also been recorded among the Negroes of Trinidad, where it is known as Susu, and where it is obviously an African retention, which can be traced back to Yoruba origin. In Nigeria, the Esusu group is commonly known in English as a contributions club. In the extensive literature on the Yoruba themselves, the Esusu is only infrequently mentioned. The most detailed description is that of Ajasafi in 1924, which is quoted here in its 6 parts, A to F, in full in the footnotes. So let me see. Let me jump A to F. So A, every member shall pay a certain fixed sum of money regularly at a fixed time, say every 5th or 9th day, and one of the subscribing members shall take the total amount thus subscribed for his or her own personal use. The next subscription shall be taken by another member. This shall so continue rotationally until every member has taken. Right. So it's a rotation type thing, and I'll talk about some of the issues that could arise if the paper itself doesn't talk about it, right? Johnson in 1921 states briefly that, quote, Esusu is a universal custom for clubbing together of a number of persons for monetary aid. A fixed sum agreed upon is given by each at a fixed time, usually every week, and placed under a president. The total amount is paid over to each member in rotation. This enables a poor man to do something worthwhile where a lump sum is required. So that's often the impetus for this, right? There are laws regulating the system. In the Yoruba dictionary, Esu, i.e. Esusu, is defined as, quote, a club organized for the purpose of assisting members in money matters, end quote. Actually, the Esusu differs from a club in that many Esusu groups hold no meetings and that the members frequently are not known to one another. Even the head of the Esusu group may not know who all the members are. Moreover, the term Esusu refers to the fund rather than to the group of contributors. One may say, I took my Esusu, or money, today, but one must say, I went to the meeting place, I went to the meeting or place of my Esusu today. The number of contributors, the size of the contribution, and the length of the intervals at which they are made vary from one group to another. For the purpose of illustration, however, we may imagine a simple case where 20 members contribute 1 shilling each month. At the end of 20 months, which completes the cycle in this case, each member will have contributed 20 shillings or £1, and will, on one occasion, have received the amount of £1 in return. In theory, at least, each member is paid back in one lump sum exactly what he has paid in contributions during the course of one cycle. There's neither gain nor loss, but the advantage to the members is that they have available a large sum of money with which to make expensive purchases or to meet debts of considerable size. Furthermore, an attempt is made to pay the fund to members at times when they have special needs of it for particular purposes. Although the mechanism differs, its function resembles that of installment buying in Western society. The size of the contribution varies widely from one Esusu group to another. Although 1 penny, 3 pence, and 1 shilling are probably the most common amounts, contributions of, let's say, $50, $1, $3, $6, etc., right, were cited by informants in 1937 by other sums may be agreed upon. The contributions are usually made monthly, fortnightly, every 15 days, according to Yoruba reckoning, every 8 days, every 9th day, or every 4 days, right? However, any convenient interval may be selected, and the market women of IFE have special Esusu groups of their own with contributions of a halfpenny or 1 penny daily. So, this is this is an old paper describing this phenomenon, and the idea is simply that you have a set value that you put in, you have a place within the rotation. I've known of some Esus that were 100 people in the group, and I'm talking they're getting big money at the end of it, tens of thousands of dollars at the end, and so forth and so on. Now, I'll pause here to ask this question. How many of you are familiar with the Esusu? How many of you have been a part of an Esusu? Do you have any horror stories when it comes to the Esusu? Because I know of stories. Growing up, my grand cousin used to run an Esu, and I know that she had her problems with it at times. Folks got their draw, never heard of again, right? What has been your experience? And again, remember that question I asked at the beginning. Some of you are probably way better with money matters than I am in terms of investing and growing money. Is there a way to update the Esusu right? To supercharge it, to make it where the gains are a little bit more than what you put in. Can you work with a bank at the center of it? You guys throw your ideas out at me. Let's talk about it. Right? However, any convenient interval may be selected, and the market of women of IFE have special Esusu groups of their own, with contributions of a half-penny or 1 penny daily. The length of the cycle depends both on the length of the intervals between contributions and on the number of members. Several Esusu in IFE with intervals of 8 days were said to have cycles of 4 or 5 years, which would give a membership of about 200. Wow, okay. 4 or 5 years, wow. The value of the Esusu fund collected at the end of each interval depends upon the size of the contributions and on the number of members. The value of the fund is, did I read this already? No, the value of the fund is generally set at a round number, let's say $1, $5, $10, etc., so that the number of members is indirectly related to the size of the contributions. If 18 members have agreed to join an Esusu group with contributions of 1 shilling each, 2 of them will usually volunteer to pay 2 shillings each in order to bring the value of the fund up to an even pound. The number of memberships need not, therefore, be the same as the number of members. A single individual may hold more than 1 membership in a given Esusu group by regularly making more than 1 contribution and receiving the fund more than once during a single cycle. Conversely, a single membership may be shared by 2 or more individuals who are not able to afford the entire contribution entirely. That's a common thing that I noticed growing up. Thus, a contribution of 1 shilling may be divided between 2 individuals who give 6 pence each. Between 3 individuals, 2 of whom gives a 3 pence each, while the third contributes 6 pence, or between 3 individuals who give 4 pence each. These several individuals count as a single member of the Esusu. So that's the thing you can do too. You could have a unit, you could go by units, and multiple people can make up that unit, and you guys figure out your sharing arrangement, or you could go as individuals, right? These several individuals count as a single member of the Esusu, and when their turn comes to receive the Esusu fund, they share it proportionately according to their contributions. Again, each individual receives exactly what he has actually contributed. It's also common for a single individual to belong at the same time to several different Esusu groups. I saw this a lot as well when I was growing up, which may have different contributions and varying intervals of payment. A poor man cannot afford to join Esusu groups with large contributions, while a wealthy man does not bother with those with small contributions. The larger Esusu groups are divided into 4 or more subgroups or roads, which are numbered 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, according to the order in which they receive the fund, which is rotated among the subgroup in turn. If in our simplified example, we assume that there are 4 subgroups, each with 5 members, the order in which the monthly fund of £1 is received by the 20 members can be represented as follows. And if you're looking at the screen right now, you can see there's 4 columns labeled 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and the numbering system goes for the first column is 1, 2nd is 2, 3rd is 3, 4th is 4, and then back to the first column, which begins at 5, and so forth and so on. So this just gives you the distribution, right, of how the monthly fund is received, right? This representation is idealized, as already indicated, in that a single individual may hold more than 1 membership. For example, you could be you could have the second hand, which occurs in the 2nd round. You could have the 6th or the 10th or something like that. So you could have multiple hands in this Esusu. This representation is by paying 3 shillings monthly, and that a single membership, for example, hand number 6, may be shared by several individuals who contribute 1 shilling jointly. It is further idealized that the fund may be split among 2 or more members of the same subgroup, and that the order in which the fund is received may be varied from one cycle to another within the subgroup to make allowance for the momentary needs of its members, and that the subgroups do not necessarily have an equal number of members and thus do not receive the same fund the same number of times during a cycle. So, you know, my experience with this Esusu is that it's usually a poor man's game, but as the paper sort of suggests, it's not always a poor man's game. Like I told you, I've seen Esusus and I see daily affirmations by Pauline is in the room. She knows it the same way I know it, of course. She says, I'm aware of Esu, as Bahamians call them, or partners, as Jamaicans call them. I believe they do benefit people who need a large sum of money for tuition, etc. So yeah, so daily affirmation by Pauline just hit the point I was about to make. Like, the poor man will involve themselves in an Esu, right? If they have, let's say they want to put a down payment on a house or a car or something a few weeks from now, you know, a few weeks or a few months from now, you'll take a later hand, right? And when you take your later hand, you'll try to line it up so that it's around the time when you need that payment, when you need that big lump sum of money to be paid out. The problem that I always saw with Esu growing up, and daily affirmations by Pauline, it should be familiar, is that the person who gets the first hand, the first 1 or 2 hands, it's not uncommon for them to kind of F off after. And so the president of the Esu then has to sometimes take up that hand. So it's a kind of a crazy setup, so to speak, because you could set this thing up, and if people aren't, you know, I guess you call it trustworthy, you know, if people don't have follow through, they'll drop out after they get their hand, and now how do the rest of the people get paid? Right? And it's already often the case that the president may have to cover an extra hand just to make sure the numbers even out in the end anyway. So it wasn't uncommon when I saw, like I said, a grand cousin of mine's had to cover that hand, right? If you're here listening with me live, make sure you guys click the like button. Make sure you click the like button. Right now, the likes aren't equal to the live views that I'm seeing. So make sure you guys click the like button. Let's get those numbers up. Now, if you scale the Esusu up, and let's say you got money, right? Let's say you have some money to your name, but you know, you could put in 1,000 a week or something like that. You're talking tens of thousands of dollars, depending on how long the cycle goes. And some people might be wondering, those who are unfamiliar, they might be wondering, well, what the hell is the point? Why don't you just save your money in a bank during that time? Well, if you do that, right, it's no longer this kind of credit institution for the community, right? By doing the Esu, or the Esusu as the Yoruba call it in Nigeria, right? It allows people in the community a chance at getting a lump sum of money. It's better than a loan. You don't own anyone. You didn't have to open up a bank account where there might be fees for having the account in the first place, etc., etc. Right? So it has its purpose. My question again to you guys: everything needs to be looked at again. Is there a way to elevate this Esusu in this modern time to be more than just, you know, to be more than what it was. I'm not knocking what it was. Again, I grew up, and a lot of times that's how we were able to eat, or you know, able to pay for something, school fees or something like that. So I get it. I can never knock it. But I'm just asking, have you ever considered this scheme in the modern setting and how we could improve upon it, I guess? Anyone who wishes to do so may found an Esusu group, provided that others are willing to entrust their money to him. That's a big issue. He simply announces his proposal to his friends, and those who wish to join indicate their intention. They in turn inform their acquaintances of the proposed Esusu, and those who are interested express their desire to join. The founder becomes the head of the Esusu, right? The Olori Esusu, Olori Esu, and is responsible for the fund and its payment to the members or the subgroups in rotation. Friends of the founder who have applied directly to him for admission become heads of the roads and may be made responsible for collecting the contributions and making the disbursements within their subgroups, which consists of the members who have applied to them rather than to the founder for admission. Now, this is an interesting part, and maybe daily affirmations from Pauline might have more insight into this. Not sure, but when the way we did it, I don't remember there being a subgroup type thing to it, right? The way we did it, there were no heads of the roads type stuff. It was just pretty basic and straightforward, right? And the way this sounds a little bit like a pyramid. I hate to use the word, but a pyramid scheme. I hate to use the word scheme anywhere around this discussion that we're talking about our ancestors creating this system. But it sounds like a pyramid scheme where you're in the regular straightforward rotation, let's say 20 people, you're one of the 20. But at the same time, it seems like while you're in that rotation, you have rotations like, you know, like pyramid-like rotations beneath you as well. And again, I'm not the greatest money guy, so you guys who are good at computations might be able to offer an idea of how that can be utilized. Can a pyramid within this Esu rotation work? I'm not sure. To continue, because of the manner in which they are formed, the subgroups may vary in size. It's possible, according to informants, for a subgroup to consist of only one individual, the head of the road, where an individual applies directly to the founder for admission, but brings no other members into the Esusu group. The first round is not usually paid out at the time it is collected, since it is customary to wait until the second interval to see if any other people apply for membership, and then pay out two funds at the same time. Those who actually join an Esusu group may be refused payments. It is felt that they will not keep up their payments. So they could be refused if it's felt then they're not going to keep up with payments in order to keep the value of the fund at a convenient round number, or to keep from having so many members that it will be difficult to keep track of their payments. So, you know, as I'm reading that leads me to ask a question. Yeah, Daily Affirmations confirms my memory. There wasn't a subgroup. It was straightforward. It went by hands or rotation. You know, I grew up every Friday taking money for Esu to my grand cousin, right? And so I know there was no subgroup business involved in it. But so this Nigerian way, is the Nigerian way so far, we're not done with the paper, but is the Nigerian way the way to do it? I'm not sure. Those of you who are from other parts of the diaspora, how did you guys do it? Was it straightforward, or was it more closely related or similar to what this paper is describing as the Nigerian way of doing it? Post those comments and I'll read them live on air. A member pays his contributions to the head of his subgroup and may have no direct dealings with the Esusu head. The heads of the subgroups turn over their collections to the head of the Esusu, see to it that their subgroups receive the fund in proper order, and pay out the fund to the members of their subgroups. The head of the Esusu may delegate considerable authority to the heads of his subgroups, holding them responsible only for bringing in the correct amount of money at the end of each interval, and leaving it to them to make the collections. In some cases, the head of the Esusu does not know the identity of the members, since he deals only with the heads of his subgroups. At least one man in IFE, however, refused to organize his Esusu into groupings, insisting on knowing each of his members personally and making his collections directly from them. That sounds familiar. A member who has an immediate need for money to cover a specific purchase or debt may apply to the head of his subgroup for the Esusu fund. Unless the head of his subgroup feels that he is likely to default or that he is misrepresenting the urgency of his need, the fund is paid to him the next time that it becomes the turn of his subgroup. According to informants, the order of rotation of the fund among the subgroups would not be altered to meet individual needs, but otherwise applications of this kind are treated with consideration by the heads of the subgroups. When the fund is assigned on the basis of need rather than rotation, it is referred to as a hand of the Esusu. If several members apply for the same fund, the head of the subgroup has the authority to assign it to the first applicant, or to split it among two or more members. An individual who applies for the fund at a specific time generally must be prepared to accept one of these two alternatives, or to have his request refused. Only an unusually considerate head of a subgroup would agree to let a member have a specific amount that he needs at the moment, rather than assigning him the whole fund, half the fund, or a third or fourth part of it. Now, I know that there were instances where folks needed their funds sooner than they originally anticipated, or they needed half of it sooner or whatever. And I remember that folks could do that. And you had to make it up later on, or the president made up the rest of the time. There's ways that they used to work that out back in the day. But I know it used to come up for sure, right? So you could do something similar in that sense, right? A person needs to get their funds in week 5 as opposed to week 10. If you're the head of the fund, you might have to kind of borrow against, so to speak, and give them their money, or the part of the money up front that they want. But there's going to be some reckoning later on to make sure you get back the rest of those funds. Here's a question for you guys who with me. Considering that when you talk about like a rotation could be a member, as in a single person, or it could be a group of people. Greetings to Kevin Care 42 who's in the room. Kevin Care 42 just hit the room. Greetings to him. My question is, could you scale up an Esusu? So let's talk about the Caribbean nations for a second. Could you scale up something where each nation puts X amount of millions or whatever into a fund, right? And at the end of every rotation, there's a considerable number a considerable amount of money, right, that's to be claimed in a hand. So let's say you have a Esusu, an Esusu, and Haiti is in the group, right? And Haiti wants to have a lump sum of money to improve infrastructure or something like that. And every Caribbean nation or every African nation, right, puts in, and at the end of at a certain point in the rotation, wherever Haiti is in that rotation, they get the lump sum. They get to work on infrastructure. They don't have to borrow IMF funds. They don't have to have some Chinese come in and build something which you're going to owe them for later. Is that feasible in your minds, the listeners? Is that something that's feasible in terms of us solving our own problems? Y'all let me know in the chat room. I'll read your comments on air. If several members apply for the same fund, the head of the subgroup has the authority to assign it to the first applicant or to split it among two or more members. An individual who applies for the fund at a specific time generally must be prepared to accept one of these two alternatives or to have his request refused. Only an unusually considerate head of a subgroup would agree to let a member have a specific amount that he needs at the moment, rather than assigning him the whole fund, half the fund, or a third or fourth part of it. If the Esusu fund is split in this way between two or more members, each of them will split the fund again before the end of the cycle so that they will receive the full amount that they have paid in. Splitting of the Esusu funds between several members in this way is also encouraged by some heads of the subgroup in order to decrease the chances of their defaulting after they have received the fund. That makes sense. Like I said, that's one of the biggest problems with those ASUs. That someone get their lump sum, they go about, they F off and go about and do what they gotta do with their money, and default on the rest of the members. And because this is not tied to anything solid, right? You usually couldn't really go after them, if memory serves me correct. There was no real unit, right, to go after them. I see in the chat room we have some folks who have joined me and are commenting. I always like it when there's comments in the chat room. Like I always say, it makes the discussion livelier, and we all get to learn something because we're all different individuals from different places, or or different groups of places. KW Don 7 is here once again. KW Don 7 says, I have heard of partner draw. My father used to participate in one years ago, but I'm not familiar with it. If I remember correctly, KW Don 7 told me his parents were Jamaican. So you definitely, I'm sure you're familiar with it. Believe me. Kevin K 42 says, in the early days of Harlem, there was a version of Esusu. The banks were not giving loans, so black people came together financially. We are all we got. That's a good point. That's a good point. That's why I said I'm pretty sure it was practiced here in the States too, and Kevin K just backed that thought up, right? Instead of having to go to the rigmarole of a bank for a bank loan, which you're probably going to tell you no about, if you get enough people together in your community, right, enough honest and trustworthy people, you can make it happen. NYC Beauties is in the room again. You guys make sure to check out NYC Beauties. Again, NYC Beauties is a photographer that has a project, Beauty of the Black Woman. You can go on NYC Beauty's YouTube channel. Make sure subscribe and like the content, right? Beautiful women, beautiful beautiful pictures. Also check out Daily Affirmations by Pauline's channel as well. NYC Beauty says, once there's trust, there will be success. Trust first. Daily Affirmation by Pauline says it's feasible, but I believe each nation would have to put up a deposit in a bank with an agreement that if they don't pay their hand, the money can be automatically drawn from an account. See, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm thinking about. Like, is there a way, and again, the bank needs to be like a community bank, right? Like a credit union or whatever type bank, right? But that's exactly right. You have to have security, right? And then what I want to figure out is if we're talking big money, we're talking money on nation level, right? Is there a way that money that's held, I guess you could call it an escrow, that security deposit, is it a way to get interest on that money, right, while it's being held, right, to compound and build more wealth, off that money? That's kind of, it's in that region that I've been thinking about this on a bigger scale. Black Excellence says we have to, Black Excellence is here again. Black Excellence says we have to get back to the days of trusting one another, black people. Afro Jam. I haven't seen Afro Jam here in a while, but I think last time Afro Jam said he or she is around. So I guess Afro Jam is one of our lurkers who's listening but isn't saying much. Afro Jam says would need a true Pan-African union for it to work, not the AU. Maybe groupings by population size or infrastructural needs of nations. Afro Jam, I want you to expand on that thought just a little bit more for me. Daily Affirmations by Pauline says, I believe it is possible to get interest, especially on millions, in an account. You see, that's what I'm talking about, right? We started this year talking about, let's talk about abundance, right? Let's talk about health, wealth, and relationships. And Esusu is all of those things, right? And Esusu represents all three of those things, for example, right? And so this is what our ancestors did to get by. And I'm talking our recent ancestors, like I'm telling you, right? Like, I was the carrier for my grandmother and them when they did these Esus and stuff. And so this is recent and still ongoing, right? We've carried this on still. I think because of how many banks are now popping up in our communities and this, that, and the other, and the fact that these folks want our money and they actually entice us to open bank accounts and put our money in their banks. I think the ASU might be struggling a little bit now. Not as many ASUs as they were. Like when I was growing up home, there was always an ASU going on. As this paper stated, some people are parts of multiple ASUs, right? So now I'm saying, how can we take this? How can we take this ancient concept that we've had, and how can we build it to something on the level of nations practicing this? Remember, this is also group economics. It's something that you always hear thrown around, but you never really hear how to carry it out. I appreciate you guys' comments. Keep the comments coming. I'll read them on air. Like I said, I think whenever we have the comments flowing, the discussions are great. And there's also an opportunity for us to think together. It's also like a think tank moment, right? How can we make something like this make more sense? The member who receives the fund must contribute to it and to all subsequent funds until the cycle is completed. after which he is free to withdraw from the group if he wishes. When a member defaults during a cycle in which he has received all or part of the fund, the head of his subgroup asks him to repay whatever excess he has been paid over the amount that he has contributed. If a defaulter fails to pay, he can be sued in court for what he owes. You know, when I was growing up, maybe you could have been sued in court. I just can't remember hearing about that. The only thing I could think that could happen is people take some street justice on you, right? But if a defaulter fails to pay, he can be sued in court for what he owes, and the case is treated under customary law like one involving debts. As in the case of bad debts, however, it may be impossible to recover the money even when a favorable decision has been won in court. While in addition, the cost of the summons fee may be lost. And that's what I think was the problem. To go to court and pay the fees and all that stuff, and you still mightn't get the money back. As a result, the Esusu head makes every effort to settle the matter out of court. Some Esusu heads insist on keeping the first round of contributions at the beginning of each cycle as a reserve to cover deficits incurred by members defaulting. In other cases, the deficit may be met from a subsequent round of contributions, which is collected for this purpose without paying out the fund on that occasion. When a member defaults during a cycle in which he has not received the fund, or where he has paid in more than he has taken out, he does not lose what he has contributed. He applies to the Esusu head through the head of his subgroup for the balance that is due him, and at the end of the cycle, he is paid from the amount that is left over. When a member defaults, an attempt is made to find someone else to take his place. That's what I remember happening. Or one of the members to assume an additional contribution so that the value of the fund will not have to be decreased. In some cases, the head of the Esusu holds the subheads responsible for the contributions of any defaulters within their own subgroups. In both cases, the excess contributions are returned to those who have paid them when the Esusu fund is divided. An individual's credits and debts in an Esusu group are inherited as part of his estate. They have a footnote here that says, should a member of the Esusu society die while the Esusu is not closed, his children or nearest of kin receive the amount subscribed by him or pay the amount standing against him. That sounds about right. When a member defaults, it is said that he dies on the road. If an individual who begins with 5 memberships finds it necessary to reduce his contributions to an amount equivalent to 2 memberships, 3 members are considered to have died on the road. He receives the fund twice during that cycle and collects the balance due him after the cycle has been completed. When a large number of members default on their payments, even if the surpluses are covered from those who have received the fund, the Esusu is scattered. Each member asks the head of his subgroup for a refund of the money he has contributed. These requests are relayed to the head of the Esusu, who repays them out what he collects from those who received the fund during the incomplete cycle. The group may be disbanded at the end of a cycle without financial complications if an insufficient number of members wish to continue. So you see that this system wasn't something thrown together. It wasn't haphazard, right? This thing made sense. It was planned out and it was executed. And there was contingencies. Someone felt this 2 people who dropped out, you look to get 2 more people. Like I said, when I was growing up, shout out to my cousin Nell, who was my grand cousin. She kept that thing going for most of the time I could remember her and I being alive together. She passed away. I remember when she passed away. Why can't we come up with deviations that have as much or more impact today? Right? In the chat room, Afro Jam still hasn't come back to me, but in the chat room, Daily Affirmations by Pauline says, I believe it is possible to get interest, especially on millions in account. Oh yeah, she said it before. They are active in the islands in South Florida. I was surprised to see people from all professions still participating in Esusu. People who defaulted had a bad name in the community grapevine. No one trusted them, and they were unofficially banned from participating. That's absolutely true. That's absolutely. If you defaulted on an Esusu, that was it for you. That was it for you, and your trustworthiness in the community. And again, you know, for those of you who don't know what the Caribbean is like, we live in relatively small communities, right? We live like in the Bahamas, we call it constituencies, right? And a lot of constituencies, you know, are close together. So you could be from one constituency, but you move around in about 5, 6 of them well, let me not say 5, 6, in 4 or 5 of them in your daily life, right? And I'm sure it's the same way in Jamaica. I'm certain it's the same way in Barbados, etc. Right? And so you could, now a place like Jamaica is pretty big. So if you go from one end to the next, you know, your name could be intact from one end to the next. But if you're from a more, you know, a much smaller island, and you default on an ASU, you know, say goodbye to ever participating in one of those again, probably. Members commonly keep track of their contributions by marking a line for each payment on the wall of their rooms. And each member makes a definite effort to pay his contributions promptly. If a member does not bring his contributions on the date that it is expected, the head of his subgroup sends to him for it. If the head of his subgroup is lenient, a member does not lose his membership in the Esusu group or forfeit the money he has already paid in if his contribution is late. However, members who are slow in paying their contributions are considered bad risk. You know, that tells you how much we've maintained our Africans, right? But that's just how we look at it at home. If I had to run you down for some money, trust me, you're considered a bad risk after that. It is felt that they may default after they have received the Esusu fund, so that regardless of their immediate needs, they are not permitted to receive the fund until the end of the cycle. The penalty for failure to pay contributions promptly is forfeiture of the chance to receive the fund when it is most needed. 2 types of Esusu groups were differentiated by informants: those whose membership is open to anyone, although it may be drawn largely from the group of relatives inhabiting the compound of the founder, and those whose membership is restricted primarily to the inhabitants of one compound. The restricted Esusu groups are associated with the meetings of the wives of the compound and the meetings of the daughters of the compound, with the contributions and the disbursement of the fund occurring at their regular meetings. In the former case, the Ayali acts as the head of the Esusu, and if none of the members have made special application for the fund, it is customarily given to the woman responsible for providing food for that particular meeting. Although the men of the compound hold similar meetings, they prohibit the formation of Esusu within their groups because it is felt that the harmony of the compound, which is considered far more important than an Esusu, might be disturbed if the Esusu were to be scattered. That's an interesting thing. That's an interesting thing. Unrestricted Esusu whose membership is open to all are very common. According to informants, there is one in every compound in Ifa. In other words, in each compound, someone has founded an Esusu, which is open to individuals from all parts of the city. The larger of the unrestricted Esusu may include members from each of the 5 wards of life. Oh, sorry, of Ife. I keep saying life, of Ife. And the subgroups may correspond to the precincts. For example, the political subdivisions of the wards. Right? So like I just talked about, we call it constituencies, some places call it wards, some places call it parishes, right? So that's basically what they're talking about here, right? You could have these open ASUs with people in it from all over, the city, right? From any constituency, any ward, any parish, right? So that's how expansive the reach of some of these ASUs can be, right? Which I think, in a sense, shows how enticing they are, right? There's something to be said about a savings program where you decide when you could get your lump sum, and at the same time, you could help other people in your community, right, amongst your people, get a lump sum as well. There's something that's to be said about that. No fees, no restrictions. You know what you're getting into from the jump. When the amount of the Esusu fund is very large, for example, 20 pounds or more, a diviner, a babalawo, may be called in to select the subhead for each precinct so as to be certain of finding one who will not abscond with the funds. That's a very important note. The case of a restricted Esusu of the daughters of a compound may be examined in some detail. This group was founded about 1927 by Humami, who served as informant. At one of the regular meetings of the daughters of the compound, she suggested the formation of a Esusu for the good of the compound and in order to help the compound. Before it was actually established, some of the daughters of the compound brought their contributions to Humani and to Alice, Comfort, and Virginia. These girls were appointed heads of the 4 subgroups when the Esusu was established at a subsequent meeting of the daughters of the compound. Humani automatically became the head of the Esusu as well because she had first suggested it. The standard contribution was set at 1 shilling monthly and 40 members were taken, giving a total fund of 2 pounds. Humani herself did not know how many individuals were actually represented by the 40 members or how many of the members were actually from her own compound, except that in her own subgroup, there was 1 girl from a different compound. Since the group was made up almost exclusively of daughters of the same compound who were related to each other, the membership of the 4 subgroups was evened up. Each of the 4 subgroups was put in charge of 10 members with whom she had influence so that it would be easier for her to collect their contributions. So, when you think about what they're describing here too, there's also a leadership aspect here, right? There's also a leadership aspect where you, as the head of the Esusu, right, have to be charismatic enough to earn the trust of the people and earn the participation of the people involved, so that you don't have people defaulting. There's also a business mindset you have to have. You can't be afraid of money. You can't be afraid of abundance. So there's a couple of different elements going on here when you talk about an Esusu. And if you notice in this part of the reading, we're talking about like compounds. So we're talking about group economics, right? Economics in your group. And this is the Esusu or the Esu, or however you want to call it. It's something where you can do this within your family. You can do this within your family. When I moved to New York, I learned that the Asians was doing something like it. So let me give you the example that was explained to me that Asians do. Asians come together, of course, in black communities, but they come together and they put money up together and say in a family. And they will open up a Chinese restaurant. They don't hire outside of their people, they all work in the restaurant. While they're working in the restaurant, they have a rotation set up. One will get the next store. Pingangeo will get the store after that. Right? And so forth and so on. And that's a cold game. That's a cold game. So when you see Dynasty Chinese restaurant number 1, and then you go somewhere else and you see number 2, and you go somewhere number 3, or you see Lucky number 1, Lucky number 2, there's a reason why that happens. That's how they go about doing that. They'll work and make that money. A bunch of them will live together, huddle together in the same apartment, and within a couple years, every one of them will have their own Chinese restaurant across whatever community. That's another way of looking at the Esusu. And I think we kind of overlook that a lot. I think we would, a lot of us would talk about how, well, the trustworthiness and blah, blah, blah. But obviously, right, there are groups who can practice the trustworthiness enough. I've seen Mexicans do it too. In the chat room, Afro Jam just said too many countries. So Afro Jam, let me go back to his or hers original comment. Afro Jam originally said you would need a true Pan-African Union for it to work, not the African Union. Maybe groupings by population size or infrastructural needs of nations. Afro Jam then comes back a while later and says too many countries, different needs, ethnic groups, geography, economic dependencies on different resources, and levels of infrastructural development. Esusu groups for specific issues. Afro-Jam says could draft workers from all nations in that Esusu, build trust between nations and share ideas, findings, not only with money, right? So Afro-Jam kind of had commented this before I even talked about the Asian thing, right? So that's one thing we kind of fleshed out in our conversations here, that the Esusu doesn't always have to just be money itself. It could be labor. 20-member Esusu helps me build my house from ground to finish. Next week, we all join in and build, daily affirmations house. The following week is Afro Jam. Right? The week after that is Kevin Care 42, KW Don 7, right? Etc., etc. The pro-black perspective. Right? So it's not just money, as Afro Jam pointed out, and as I illustrated with the Asian example. Right? Which is a combination of both things. Right? But there's ways, but the point I'm getting at is how do we make this concept work for us today? And that's definitely one of the ways. Like, whenever something breaks out on a medical tip in the Caribbean, that's big. Do you know Cuban doctors are usually always called in, and they usually do a good job too. You know, so that's like something that we can do, right? There's a disaster, and let's say a hurricane hits the Bahamas, the southern Bahamas or something like that. Let's get all the different groups of people from different islands coming in and helping those folks to bring the infrastructure right back up, you know, in no time. And when a disaster hits Jamaica the next time, we do the same. When a disaster hits Barbados, the same is done after that, and so forth and so on. So we could take this concept and not just apply it to, you know, just money, although I still think, depending on the scope, you can do it on a money level as well, but there's other things that are important, like Afrojam pointed out, that you can work this concept on. To continue with the paper, each was made responsible for collecting 10 shillings and for the contributions of any defaulters for which they were to be reimbursed at the end of each cycle. None of the funds were set aside for the officers who served without pay. In September 1937, this Esusu had completed 6 cycles, each lasting about 20 months, and its officers were waiting for the beginning of the cocoa season when people would have more money before starting a new cycle. In the compound of a different informant, there was an unrestricted Esusu with a contribution of 3 pence, or threepence, for which the fund dispersed amounted to 30 shillings, giving a membership of 120. Another unrestricted Esusu centered in the compound of his wife, had a contribution of 1 shilling on a fund of £6, again giving a membership of 120. The second informant himself belonged to a third Esusu group with a contribution of 10 shillings monthly and a membership of 14, giving a total fund of £7. This latter is a new type of unrestricted Esusu, limited to salaried men, with the exception of the informant himself, who has a reputation for being able to earn money, but who must wait until the very end of each cycle to receive the fund because he does not have a regular income. Formerly, when he was employed by the Nigerian police, he belonged to an Esusu group consisting of 24 of his colleagues, which had a contribution of £5 monthly or a fund of £120. This Esusu continued until the government prohibited its employees from joining Esusu in order to protect them from going into debt when the Esusu scattered or the Esusu had absconded with the funds. So you see, we always had, you know, there's always the human issue. The human issue of people not living up to their word and their promise, right? Before I go on to this absconding of Esusu funds, let me take a quick station ID break. I'll be back on the other side.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is BASCOM. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, indeed. Also check out the Queen's Council podcast. They are a very entertaining group. Check them out as well on KWAZ Radio. So like I was saying, we're in the part of the paper here where folks are talking about those who abscond with the Esusu funds, and it is common enough to make the Yoruba wary of entrusting their money to strangers. The reputation of the Esusu head is as important a consideration in joining an Esusu group as the amount of the contributions and the intervals at which these become due. In order to feel that his money is safe, an individual joins an Esusu group headed by a person who has an established reputation for honesty and a man who is known to be dishonest would find it almost impossible to found an Esusu group. This goes back to what Daily Affirmations by Pauline said. Well, it kind of goes back to that. Since most individuals join through the heads of the subgroups and may have no direct contact with the Esusu head himself, they first ask who the head of the Esusu is. This is also considered a wise precaution if the solicitor is suspected of collecting money under false pretenses. The heads of restricted Esusu groups generally make no profit. They have only the privilege of being recognized as the head of the group and the satisfaction of asserting their authority over its members by granting or denying their requests for funds. And I think, side note, I think this right here might be a part of why you don't see or hear about the Esusu as much as you once did. Even when I moved to New York, amongst Caribbean groups, communities, you still heard it talked about, and you still heard people talking about participating in them. I think though, because it's a almost thankless job and you're not paid or anything, I think a lot of people don't feel to take on the responsibility. Also, in a place like the US, in a place like New York, it's too big, I feel, in many cases, to really control the members in the group, right? And that's New York City I'm talking about. When you talk about Florida or, some of these spots where you got to jump on a highway just to go to the grocery store, New York City is not like that, by the way, for those who don't know. But when you got to jump on a highway or highways to get to and fro, you don't really want to be dealing with no one, in charge of, seeing to these funds being collected and stuff like that, right? In some unrestricted Esusu groups, the members willingly contribute an additional round at the end of each cycle, which is divided among the head and subheads. So that's cool. There are, moreover, individuals who make a business out of being the head of unrestricted Esusu groups, although the practices employed by these professionals are said not to occur in Esusu groups restricted to the members of a compound or to salaried employees. Although these practices are regarded as unscrupulous, they are so difficult to prevent that they are more or less taken for granted. It is commonly expected that when one joins an unrestricted Esusu, 2 of the funds each cycle will be kept by the Esusu head, but it is thought to be unlikely the Esusu head could take a third round for himself during the cycle without being caught. If an Esusu group has a large number of uneducated members contributing small amounts, it is most difficult for them to prevent the Esusu head from taking 1 or 2 rounds for himself. Even if one of the members noticed that his tally showed that he had contributed his penny 50 times, while he had received only 4 shillings of 48 pennies, essentially. When he took the fund, he might not be certain that the discrepancy was not due to his miscalculation. However, if still another contribution were called for, he would compare notes with other members and refuse to pay. Since it's almost impossible to prove the exact number of contributions which have actually been made, such a case would not be taken to court. However, when the cycle was completed, all those who suspected the head of the Esusu of cheating would drop out. The individual members protected against unscrupulous and dishonest Esusu heads mainly by the right of withdrawal from the group and by the fact that the head knows that he will lose his members if he is too greedy. Another of the sharp practices of a professional Esusu head is to keep the first round for himself, saying that it is a reserve against defaulters, but failing to account for its expenditure. Another is to insist that a member forfeits his equity in the fund if he does not make his payments promptly by a certain hour of the appointed day. Traditionally, the head of the Esusu kept track of the contributions and of the disbursements of the funds by a series of marks on the wall of his room. Today, a literate member of the group may serve as its clerk. and keep its accounts, but when this does not suffice to prevent members from overpaying. Oh, I'm sorry, but even this does not suffice to prevent members from overpaying. Professional Esusu heads commonly guard against the defaulters by establishing a reserve fund or by holding the subheads responsible for the contributions of defaulters within their subgroups. The heads of each subgroups in turn may insist on splitting each fund among several members to decrease the chances of their defaulting. The professional Esusu head may sit in his house and wait for the heads of the subgroups to bring the contributions to him, or he may have the members from their contributions directly bring their contributions directly to him. In either case, there are meetings of the members, although with Esusu groups headed by non-professionals, the members may sit down together at regular meetings. Such a meeting is known as Ajo Esusu or Ajo Esu, and the house in which it is held is referred to as the Isle Esusu or Isle Esu. Right, so you see, it's Esusu or Esu, right, and some people call it Esu. Right. The contributions are paid at these meetings, and those may be speeches, and there may be speeches urging the members to bring in their contributions promptly so that the group will not break up. Afterwards, the members may eat together before adjourning, although this is not a universal practice. If the meetings include a meal, the members provide food and drink in turn, and the meetings are held in the house of the host. The Esusu is a credit institution. All members except the ones who receive or share the very last fund of a given cycle receive an advance on their contributions, although their amount advanced declines as the cycle progresses. An attempt is made, furthermore, to make the fund available to members of the group at times when they have need for it. When an individual requires outside financial assistance, he may apply for the Esusu fund rather than borrow money from a relative or friend without interest, paying interest in money or cocoa to a regular money lender, pawning his cocoa trees, or before it was prohibited by law, pawning himself or his children. Because of the large amounts of money required at irregular and often unpredictable intervals, because of the limited opportunities for investment and saving, and because of the excessive interest rates charged by moneylenders, the Esusu has played an important role in the Yoruba economy, which shows no signs of declining under the present conditions of increasing European influence. A final point remains to be considered: the possibility that the Esusu itself may be the result of European influence. Okay. Aside from the fact that it has rarely been reported among neighboring African peoples, there's little to support this point of view. Even this fact actually is no evidence of European origin, since the other West African peoples have also been affected by acculturation to greater or lesser degrees. Furthermore, there is no European institution, particularly among those recorded among the Europeans on the west coast of Africa, which is strictly comparable, or which suggests itself as a model from which the Esusu might have been derived. The Yoruba themselves say that the Esusu is an ancient institution, and that before British pounds, shillings, and pence were introduced, it was carried on in Ife and cowries, but never in consumption commodities. Never in consumption commodities. It has been discouraged, if anything, rather than encouraged by the government, but it is still a very widespread and firmly established institution at the present time. Finally, the fact that it has been recorded in Trinidad establishes that it was part of Yoruba culture during the period of the slave trade. Right? The fact that it was in the Caribbean, right, shows that it was from the Yoruba, right, and an ancient practice. That's the end of the paper. In the chat room, Kevin Care says, reminds people to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If there's no other comments or questions or thoughts on how to boost this practice, then we'll call that an episode tonight. And I want to thank you guys for joining tonight. I'm sure there's something you could have been doing and you took your time to join me tonight. And I hope that the discussion about the Esusu, or the Esu, as I would call it, or Esu, that the Yoruba will call it, I hope you guys think about it and think about how it can be, improved upon, how you can use it in your local groups with other Black folks, right? And maybe, if you come up with something something interesting, come back, post your comment under this video, under this social media post, wherever you're finding this video in playback, and maybe we can return to this discussion in the future. I gave you an example, Afro Jam, in the comment section. Gave a suggestion, which is a great one. I gave you an example of it that certain other groups employ. This is something that we should be looking to go back to, and we should be looking. And you know where this will actually work well too? Seeing that the project that we have is this curriculum, this would work well in African-centered schools. You get a group of interested, knowledgeable people who want to see African-centered schools progress, and you start with one. One of you come together and you fund it together. And the job then is that as the school starts to get more students, get more contributions from parents, etc., then you open a second school, right? And so forth and so on. That's where this will be really well implemented, if you will, is with African-centered schools. Get a group of us together, wherever you are, get a group of people together who are on the same page. Together you design your African-centered curriculum, you open a school. Once you start getting attendance, you start getting contributions from the parents, you then turn that into a second school, you do it again, turn it into a third, etc. And that's how you can get the African-centered schools, ones that are going to produce your future leaders, your future Afrocentric, African-centered leaders. You're going to get a school, if the curriculum is right, that's going to produce people who are going to solve the problems in your communities, in your locales, etc. And that's one of the ways you can use the concept of the Esusu going forward. Anyway, guys, I hope that this was as good as an episode for you as it was for me. I'll be back again on Tuesday with another episode of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Shout out to Kevin Care 42 in the chat room, Afro Jam, Daily Affirmations by Pauline, Black Excellence, NYC Beauties, KW Dawn 7, and if I missed anyone, the Pro Black Perspective, who for some reason thought I was eating at the start of it. And make sure to subscribe to the KWAZ Radio. If you look in the comment section, you could click on them and you could go to the channel. Make sure you follow and like that channel as well. Before I go, I see Daily Affirmations by Pauline says the discussion was enlightening. We'll think about how to get involved in the South Florida community where mostly Caribbean people participate. Excellent. Excellent. And the rest of you should be thinking about it too. How can I bring, this idea, out in the forefront today and bring together Black folks participating in some kind of collective or group economics, right? And keep in mind what I said about the African-centered schools in terms of this Esusu or Esusu style thing. Anyway, guys, until next time, this has been the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Good night to all of you. Peace and blessings.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.